My sister stole my inheritance until I shared the secret while recording online. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My sister smiled for her followers, completely unaware I was about to broadcast our dead father's confession. The champagne glass in her hand caught the light of the venue's chandeliers, sparkling just like the massive diamond on her finger. It was a beautiful scene, meticulously crafted for maximum social media envy, but every cent paying for that ice sculpture, that designer dress, and that top-shelf liquor was stolen. Stolen from me, yes, but more importantly, stolen from the legacy of a man who worked his entire life just to have his final wishes violently erased. My name is Maya, and I am 28 years old. For the last 5 years of my dad Arthur's life, I was his entire world, just as he was mine. While his health slowly crumbled, failing him day by day, I was the one making the meals, managing the complicated schedules for his medications, and sitting by his bed during those terrifying midnight hospital visits. My older sister, Vanessa, was 33 and too busy curating her flawless aesthetic in another city to be bothered with anything as ugly as chronic illness. She visited twice in 5 years, always making sure to snap a quick, tragic-looking selfie by his wheelchair before rushing back to the airport. I didn't care about the money. I never did. I just wanted my dad to be comfortable in his final days. But when he finally passed away 3 months ago, the crushing grief that threatened to swallow me whole was violently interrupted by Vanessa's sudden, intense involvement. The sister who couldn't be bothered to help him use the bathroom was suddenly an expert on his estate, his assets, and his final wishes. She took everything. The house I grew up in, the modest savings he had left, the few heirloom pieces that actually meant something to our family history. She took it all using a legal document that made absolutely no sense, leaving me utterly shattered, deeply betrayed, and entirely financially ruined. I was grieving, exhausted, and naive enough to think that family bonds actually meant something when tragedy struck. I let her walk all over me because I was too numb to fight back against her aggression. But then I found the digital trail. I found the undeniable truth hidden in a place she was too arrogant and impatient to look. Standing there at her lavish engagement party, watching her play the perfect victim-turned-heiress, I knew exactly what I had to do. But her perfect digital life was about to become a devastating public nightmare. Growing up in our suburban household, the dynamic was established early and enforced with ruthless consistency. Vanessa was the untouchable golden child, a glowing beacon of social perfection who could do no wrong in the eyes of our extended family. She was afforded every luxury, every expensive piano lesson, and every ounce of praise, while I was silently designated as the reliable, invisible workhorse. When my father received his devastating diagnosis of early-onset heart failure, that long-standing dynamic shifted from mildly annoying to downright tragic. While I was practically raising myself and simultaneously learning how to flush 4 lines and monitor blood pressure, Vanessa was conveniently absent, claiming her burgeoning career required her undivided attention in the city. The truth was, she simply despised the ugly, unglamorous reality of sickness, finding it entirely detrimental to her carefully curated online aesthetic. She would swoop in perhaps twice a year, usually around major holidays, wearing a designer outfit that cost more than a month of Dad's specialized medication. She would pose for a few incredibly staged photographs next to his medical bed, post a lengthy, tear-jerking caption about the hardships of having a sick parent, and then vanish before the dinner dishes even needed to be washed. I absorbed the exhausting physical and emotional toll of his decline without a single complaint because I loved him deeply, cherishing our quiet evenings watching old movies while the medical machines hummed in the background. But even in his weakened, vulnerable state, Dad always held out a desperate, fading hope that his eldest daughter would finally step up and show him an ounce of genuine affection. I shielded him from her selfishness, constantly inventing pathetic excuses for her absence to protect his fragile heart from the crushing realization that she just didn't care. "She's just overwhelmed with her new promotion, Dad," I would lie, knowing full well she was currently posting vacation photos from a luxury resort in Tulum. I thought I was doing the noble, righteous thing by keeping the peace and absorbing the brunt of the burden all by myself. I believed my silent sacrifices were protecting our family's fragile ecosystem from complete and total collapse. I had no idea how deeply her toxic greed had already infected his final days. The nightmare officially began on a bleak, rainy Tuesday morning when the relentless beeping of the hospital monitors finally flatlined. Losing my dad felt like someone had violently ripped the oxygen from my lungs. I was entirely consumed by a blinding, paralyzing grief that made basic tasks feel impossible. I sat beside his lifeless body for hours, holding his cold hand, completely oblivious to the administrative storm that was brewing just outside the hospital room doors. Within hours of the official death pronouncement, Vanessa descended upon the hospital like a perfectly coiffed vulture draped in expensive, mourning-appropriate black cashmere. There were no real tears in her eyes, only a fierce, calculated determination that chilled me to my very core. She immediately bypassed me, introducing herself to the attending doctors and hospital administrators as the primary contact and sole decision-maker for the deceased. When our Uncle David, Dad's younger brother and my only real ally, gently suggested that we should take a moment to breathe and grieve together, Vanessa instantly shut him down. "There is no time for sentimental delays, David," she snapped, adjusting her designer sunglasses. "I have a highly specific vision for this funeral, and I will not allow Arthur's legacy to look cheap or disorganized." She seized absolute control of the arrangements, locking me out of every single meaningful decision regarding the burial of the man I had dedicated my entire adult life to serving. She ordered elaborate, insanely expensive floral arrangements and invited dozens of her wealthy, influential friends who had absolutely no connection to our father, transforming his solemn farewell into a grotesque networking event. During the wake, she stood at the front of the room, weeping flawlessly on command for the cameras, loudly recounting fabricated stories of their deeply profound father-daughter bond. I stood quietly in the back corner, physically trembling with exhaustion and quiet rage, watching her exploit his death for maximum sympathy and social currency among her elite social circle. I thought her sickening performance at the funeral was the absolute worst thing she could possibly inflict upon his memory. The very next morning, she demanded we visit the estate lawyer without any delay. The probate lawyer's office was a sterile, intimidating room completely lined with dark mahogany bookshelves that smelled faintly of old paper and stale coffee. I sat in a stiff leather chair, my eyes still swollen and bloodshot from crying, clutching a crumpled tissue while Vanessa sat perfectly upright, radiating a smug, unearned confidence. The lawyer, a tired-looking man named Mr. Gable, cleared his throat awkwardly and adjusted his glasses before pulling a crisp, heavily sealed document from his thick manila folder. I fully expected him to read the will Dad and I had discussed for years, the simple, equitable document that divided his modest assets evenly and allowed me to keep the suburban house I had tirelessly maintained. Instead, Mr. Gable began reading a heavily modified document, officially dated a mere 3 weeks before my father's death, right during the peak of his severe medical confusion. As the dense legal jargon washed over me, the horrifying reality of the situation slowly snapped into sharp, agonizing focus. The new will explicitly revoked all prior testaments, named Vanessa as the sole, uncontested executor of the estate, and left 100% of his financial assets, property, and personal belongings directly to her. I was entirely disinherited, written out of my father's legacy with a single, sweeping stroke of a pen. "This has to be some kind of horrific mistake," I stammered, my voice cracking as I desperately searched the lawyer's face for any sign of a cruel joke. Vanessa turned to me, her lips curling into a sickening, fake apologetic smile. "Dad just knew you couldn't handle the heavy financial responsibility, Maya," she purred, dripping with condescension. "He wanted me to protect the family assets because I actually understand how the real world operates." I demanded to see the physical document, my hands shaking violently as I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. The handwriting was incredibly shaky, disjointed, and entirely unlike the strong, precise script my father had utilized his entire life. I stared at the forged signature, realizing my sister had orchestrated the ultimate theft. The absolute cruelty of Vanessa's ultimate plan fully materialized exactly 48 hours after we walked out of that sterile lawyer's office. I was sitting on the floor of Dad's living room, surrounded by old photo albums, trying to process my grief, when a heavy knock echoed through the quiet house. It was a process server, coldly handing me a formal, 30-day eviction notice strictly legally mandated by the newly appointed executor of the estate, my sister. She was legally throwing me out of my childhood home, the very place I had spent the last 5 years functioning as a full-time nurse, housekeeper, and loving companion. Uncle David was absolutely furious when he found out. He immediately drove over and furiously confronted Vanessa on the front lawn, his face red with righteous anger. "This is completely immoral. Vanessa, you know damn well Arthur wanted Maya to have this house for everything she sacrificed," he yelled, his voice echoing down the suburban street. Vanessa just rolled her eyes, casually waving a manicured hand dismissively in his direction. "My duties as the legal executor require me to liquidate all redundant assets to maximize the estate's total value," she replied in a robotic, heavily rehearsed legal tone. "If she doesn't vacate the premises by the deadline, I will have the local authorities arrest her for trespassing on my private property." Uncle David tried to consult a lawyer to challenge the will based on undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity, but without hard, concrete proof of coercion, contesting the ironclad document would cost tens of thousands of dollars we simply didn't have. Defeated and entirely broken, I was forced to pack up 28 years of my life into heavy-duty black garbage bags, weeping uncontrollably as I dismantled Dad's medical bed. Vanessa stood in the doorway, tapping her foot impatiently, silently judging the speed at which I was erasing my own existence from the property. I walked out of my childhood home, leaving my father's ghost entirely in her hands. The reality of my new existence was a crushing, claustrophobic nightmare set inside a crumbling, roach-infested studio apartment on the absolute worst side of the city. While I was strictly rationing instant ramen noodles and frantically searching for any minimum wage entry-level job that would hire me, my sister was living a lavish, highly documented fantasy. Have you ever watched someone sell your childhood memories for a designer handbag while you struggle to afford basic electricity? Because that is exactly what I was forced to endure every single time I opened my phone. Vanessa's Instagram feed transformed into a sickening, endless parade of extreme wealth and luxury, entirely funded by the rapid, aggressive liquidation of my father's hard-earned life savings. She posted glamorous photos from a 5-star resort in Aspen, captioning it with pseudo-deep quotes about healing through travel and honoring her father's legacy by living life to the fullest. Meanwhile, her wealthy, incredibly oblivious fiancé, Greg, frequently commented with heart emojis, entirely unaware that his bride-to-be was essentially financing their extravagant lifestyle with stolen blood money. The absolute lowest point arrived when she started utilizing online auction sites to publicly sell Dad's most prized, intimate possessions to the highest anonymous bidder. I sat in the dark of my freezing apartment, violently sobbing as I watched his vintage, hand-carved mahogany desk, the one he taught me how to read on, sell for a fraction of its true worth. She was systematically erasing his entire history, converting his beautiful, complicated life into cold, hard cash to fund her pathetic obsession with digital clout and high society status. Every new post, every flashing notification, felt like a literal dagger twisting deeply into my already broken heart. But beneath the suffocating layers of profound grief and agonizing despair, a different kind of emotion was slowly beginning to take root in the darkness. Watching her auction off his life, a tiny, furious spark ignited in my chest. That furious spark slowly morphed into a burning obsession the day I finally forced myself to unpack the meager, pathetic cardboard boxes I had managed to salvage from the eviction. I was meticulously sorting through a dusty stack of Dad's old, meticulously kept accounting books, searching for a spare blank journal, when a folded piece of paper fluttered silently to the linoleum floor. It was a printed bank statement from a joint checking account I had briefly used to manage his daily grocery expenses roughly 2 years prior. As my eyes rapidly scanned the mundane list of pharmacy copays and utility bills, a strange, entirely out of place recurring charge suddenly caught my complete attention. It was a highly specific, monthly deduction of exactly $19.99 directed to a company called Secure Vault Encrypted Cloud Storage. My heart immediately began to hammer aggressively against my ribs as a wave of pure, undeniable confusion washed over my exhausted brain. My father was a man who still used a massive, physical checkbook, violently struggled to operate the basic functions of a standard television remote, and fundamentally distrusted the internet. There was absolutely no logical reason on earth for him to be paying for a high-level, premium encrypted data storage service unless he was intentionally hiding something incredibly important. I rushed to my cheap laptop, my fingers trembling wildly as I frantically typed the company name into the search engine, desperate for any clarifying information. The website advertised military-grade encryption, secure digital lockboxes, and a strict, unyielding zero-knowledge privacy policy that guaranteed absolute secrecy for its users. I frantically dug through the remaining bank statements, tracking the monthly charges backward through time until I found the very last recorded payment on the account. The receipt was dated just 3 days before the fake will had been allegedly signed. The discovery of that obscure cloud storage charge instantly transformed me from a grieving, defeated victim into a relentless, hyper-focused digital detective on a mission for the truth. I immediately began digging through every single notebook, scratchpad, and old email account I could physically access, desperately hunting for a username, a login portal, or a hint of a password. I even swallowed my pride and placed a tense phone call to Mr. Henderson, Dad's incredibly paranoid, tech-savvy old friend who used to fix our family computer, hoping he knew something. Apparently, my sudden, frantic inquiries did not go unnoticed, because less than 24 hours later, my phone vibrated with a vicious, heavily threatening text message directly from Vanessa. "I know you are harassing Dad's old associates and digging into closed financial accounts. Stop your pathetic, delusional snooping immediately, or my lawyers will have you arrested for criminal harassment," she wrote. Her aggressive, deeply panicked reaction only confirmed my growing suspicions. She was absolutely terrified of what I might uncover if I kept pulling at this digital thread. I completely ignored her blatant legal threats and spent 3 agonizing, sleepless nights systematically testing hundreds of password variations on the Secure Vault login screen, utilizing every significant date and name in our family history. Finally, on the 74th attempt, utilizing a combination of Dad's old military service number and my mother's maiden name, the login screen flashed a brilliant, glorious green. The portal opened, revealing a sparse, highly organized digital dashboard containing exactly one heavily encrypted, primary folder sitting completely alone in the center of the screen. I finally bypassed the security prompt, only to be hit with a final encryption lock. The secondary encryption lock was a massive, intimidating digital vault door demanding a highly specific, custom master passphrase that was clearly established by the user, not a generated code. The screen explicitly warned that I had exactly 3 attempts remaining before the entire cloud account would trigger a security protocol and permanently delete the enclosed data to protect the user's privacy. My hands were shaking so violently I had to physically pull them away from the keyboard, terrified of making a catastrophic, irreversible typo that would destroy my only chance at justice. I closed my tired eyes and desperately tried to channel my father's mindset during those terrifying, heavily medicated final weeks when he must have set this digital failsafe up. He knew his mental faculties were slipping, and he knew Vanessa was fiercely circling his estate like a shark, so the password had to be something completely unguessable to her. It had to be a deeply ingrained, unbreakable memory, a specific, intimate bond that only he and I truly shared, something Vanessa's superficial, absent nature would never allow her to know. I suddenly remembered a perfectly clear, crisp autumn morning from my childhood, long before he got sick, when we sat together in a tiny, leaking aluminum rowboat on a quiet lake. He had looked at me, smiled warmly, and whispered a specific, reassuring phrase that became our secret mantra whenever life got incredibly difficult or overwhelming. Vanessa wasn't there. She had loudly refused to go on the trip because there was no cellular reception in the woods, leaving the memory exclusively to us. I took a deep, shuddering breath, leaned forward over the glowing keyboard, and prepared to risk absolutely everything on a single, desperate childhood memory. I typed in the name of our old fishing boat and pressed the Enter key. The digital vault icon smoothly animated, unlocking with a satisfying, decisive click that echoed loudly in my silent, suffocatingly small apartment. The main folder immediately unpacked itself, revealing a single, highly compressed video file titled For Underscoring Final Under for Truth. MP4-inch complete with a timestamp verifying it was recorded the exact night before the fake will's date. I clicked the play button, completely unprepared for the absolute wave of raw, devastating emotion that violently crashed over me the second his familiar, gravelly voice filled the room. The footage was grainy and poorly lit, showing Dad sitting in his wheelchair in the dark living room, looking incredibly frail, pale, and completely terrified as he stared into the laptop camera. He held up a copy of that day's newspaper to establish the date, his hands visibly shaking, before taking a deep, rattling breath and looking directly into the lens. "Maya, if you are watching this, it means my heart finally gave out, and your sister has officially executed her horrific, disgusting plan to steal everything from you." He began, tears forming in his tired eyes. He spent the next 20 minutes explicitly detailing how Vanessa had cornered him while I was at the pharmacy, aggressively withholding his essential heart medication until he agreed to sign the heavily altered documents. He explicitly stated, clearly and coherently, that the new will was signed under extreme duress and vicious coercion, officially declaring that his original will, dividing everything fairly, was his true and absolute final wish. He sobbed openly, begging for my forgiveness for being too weak to fight her off, and pleading with me to use this recording to reclaim my rightful life and expose her toxic greed. Hearing my father cry on camera broke my heart and sealed my sister's absolute destruction. I aggressively downloaded the video file onto 3 separate, encrypted physical hard drives and uploaded it to a hidden, secondary cloud server just to ensure its absolute, unquestionable survival. However, before I could even contact Uncle David or a contingency lawyer, my apartment door violently rattled as Vanessa barged in uninvited, flanked by a massive, extremely intimidating corporate attorney. She had clearly received an automated security notification regarding the cloud login, and her perfectly contoured face was currently twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic and vicious rage. She aggressively slammed a thick, heavily intimidating legal document onto my cheap kitchen table, furiously pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "I know you hacked into his old files, you pathetic little thief, but whatever fabricated garbage you think you found is completely inadmissible in any real court of law," she spat aggressively. The lawyer coldly explained that this was an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. If I signed it, surrendering all rights to contest the estate and remaining completely silent, she would grant me a generous $10,000 gift. If I refused, she promised to utterly destroy my life, burying me in so many frivolous defamation lawsuits and restraining orders that I would be homeless and heavily indebted for the rest of my natural life. I looked at the terrifying legal threats, looked at her desperate, sweating face, and instantly realized that she didn't know I actually possessed the video. She only suspected it. I needed her to feel completely secure, entirely arrogant, and entirely off her guard so I could execute my final, devastating strike in the most public forum imaginable. I signed the worthless piece of paper, smiling as she thought she had actually won. With the NDA firmly signed, Vanessa's massive ego instantly inflated back to its normal, utterly unbearable proportions, completely convinced she had successfully neutralized the only remaining threat to her stolen empire. To celebrate her perceived total victory, she accelerated the plans for her lavish, insanely expensive engagement party, renting out the city's most exclusive, high-end botanical garden entirely on Dad's stolen dime. The event was explicitly designed to be a massive, unavoidable digital spectacle. She hired professional videographers and actively promoted a massive Instagram live stream to her 50,000 eager followers. Much to her absolute, visible shock, I formally RSVP'd yes to the ornate, gold leaf invitation, a move she entirely misread as my ultimate, humiliating submission to her newly established dominance. When I arrived at the venue wearing a simple, understated dress, she smugly allowed me inside, loudly playing the magnanimous, forgiving older sister for the benefit of Greg's incredibly wealthy, influential family. I quietly retreated to a dark corner near the massive floral arrangements, entirely ignoring the whispered insults and pointed stares, heavily focused on connecting my phone to the venue's unsecured, open Wi-Fi network. I quickly established an anonymous, highly localized digital broadcast list, carefully selecting the phones of Greg, his parents, the hired DJ, the venue coordinator, and every single one of Vanessa's vapid influencer friends. I set up the file transfer, ensuring the raw, unedited video of Dad's confession was perfectly queued up and ready to deploy at the exact moment of maximum psychological impact. I loaded the unedited video file onto my phone and stepped into the grand ballroom. The atmosphere inside the grand ballroom was absolutely electric with manufactured joy, perfectly curated lighting, and the sickening sound of clinking crystal champagne glasses echoing off the vaulted glass ceilings. Vanessa stood proudly at the center of the room, firmly gripping a silver microphone, completely glowing under the spotlight as the live stream actively broadcasted her flawless, stolen life to the internet. She began delivering a highly rehearsed, incredibly tearful speech about family legacy, loudly lamenting how much our dear departed father would have absolutely loved to see her marrying into such a prestigious, honorable family. She dramatically wiped away a perfectly timed, completely fake tear, smiling beautifully for the flashing cameras, totally consumed by her own narcissistic fantasy of absolute perfection and high society acceptance. I didn't yell, I didn't cause a physical scene, and I didn't step into the blinding spotlight to confront her directly. I simply stared at my glowing screen, selected the target list, and forcefully pressed airdrop to all. A chaotic, incredibly loud chorus of notification chimes instantly rippled through the massive room like a sudden, aggressive digital shockwave, forcefully interrupting her sickeningly sweet, fabricated monologue. People casually glanced down at their glowing screens, confused by the sudden influx of data, until Greg's wealthy father curiously clicked the massive, unprompted video file that had just forcibly appeared on his device. The music abruptly stopped as my dead father's voice echoed from 100 glowing screens. The sheer, unadulterated chaos that violently erupted in that ballroom was a beautiful, terrifying masterpiece of absolute, instantaneous social destruction that I will remember clearly for the rest of my life. Dad's frail, desperate voice declaring Vanessa a monster and detailing the horrific medical abuse echoed simultaneously from dozens of phones, completely shattering the pristine, carefully curated illusion she had spent months building. Greg's face drained of all visible color. He stared in absolute, horrified disbelief at the screen, then slowly looked up at Vanessa, finally seeing the greedy, manipulative sociopath hiding beneath the expensive makeup. He didn't even say a single word. He simply placed his champagne glass on a nearby table, turned his back on her frantic, screaming pleas, and walked out of the venue, completely followed by his disgusted parents. Vanessa was shrieking hysterically, desperately commanding the confused DJ to cut the Wi-Fi and screaming at the bewildered guests to delete the heavily encrypted file, but the digital avalanche was already entirely unstoppable. Uncle David, who had been standing quietly in the back, immediately stood up, pointed a furious, vindicated finger directly at her, and loudly announced he was calling the police and the family attorney. By the time the sun finally rose the next morning, the unedited video had violently gone viral across every major social platform, and my newly hired, heavily aggressive contingency lawyer had officially filed the emergency injunction. Vanessa screamed my name, but her carefully constructed empire was already burning to the ground. The subsequent legal battle was incredibly swift and absolutely devastating for Vanessa once the undeniable, raw video evidence officially entered the sterile halls of the local probate court. The highly irritated judge immediately threw out the forged, fraudulent will, forcefully reinstated Dad's original, equitable document, and instantly froze every single bank account Vanessa had illegally accessed. I successfully reclaimed my childhood home, aggressively changing all the locks, and managed to legally recover the vast majority of the financial assets she hadn't already foolishly squandered on designer clothes and luxury vacations. Vanessa is currently facing severe, multiple felony charges for egregious elder abuse, criminal coercion, and massive financial fraud, completely abandoned by her wealthy fiancé and entirely permanently exiled from her precious social circles. Her once flawless Instagram account is completely dark, entirely overrun by thousands of furious, disgusted comments from the very followers she had desperately tried to impress with her stolen, fabricated wealth. I am finally sitting peacefully on the wooden back porch of Dad's house, quietly drinking his favorite herbal tea, slowly allowing the immense, crushing weight of the past year to finally lift from my shoulders. The grief of losing him will always remain deeply embedded in my heart, but the agonizing nightmare of betrayal is finally, permanently over, replaced by a quiet, steady sense of absolute, undeniable justice. Some legacies are built on love, and no amount of greed can ever erase them.